Magic, revenge, and thinly veiled autobiography, it's all here. Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome to Our Shakespeare, the channel where I talk about Shakespeare from my 21st century American perspective. Today, I have got another Shortspeare video for you, which is the video series in which I try to summarize and illuminate one of Shakespeare's plays in about 5 or 10 minutes. Today, we're going to be talking about The Tempest. And if you enjoy this sort of video, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and click that little bell icon if you want to be notified every time I make a new video. But enough about that. Let's talk about The Tempest, starting with a plot summary. So, The Tempest starts out with a ship being battered by a storm at sea and eventually shipwrecking on an island. It turns out that that storm was created by the sorcerer Prospero, who happens to live on that island. We learned through exposition that 12 years ago, Prospero was the Duke of Milan, but his position was usurped by his brother Antonio with the assistance of Alonso, the King of Naples. Antonio, after usurping the dukedom, had Prospero and Prospero's young daughter Miranda set out to sea on a rickety boat in hopes that they would sink. Rather than sink and drown, Prospero and Miranda shipwrecked onto a magical island that was once home to a witch named Sycorax who died and left behind an enslaved and imprisoned servant spirit named Ariel and a deformed son named Caliban. Prospero freed Ariel from imprisonment on the condition that Ariel would serve Prospero for a set period of time, and Prospero raised Caliban like a son, only to have Caliban turn around and assault Miranda, so Prospero and Caliban had a falling out, and now Caliban is treated like a servant himself. But all of that was in the past in exposition. Now we come to what's happening now. The people on the ship that Prospero's storm had wreck on the island were none other than the usurpers of Prospero's dukedom, along with a few others. With the help of Ariel, Prospero has these people divided into 3 different groups, each group thinking that they are the only survivors of the shipwreck. The first group includes Antonio, the usurping duke, Alonso, the co-conspirating king of Naples, Sebastian, the king's brother, Gonzalo, a counselor of the king, and a few other people. Group number 2 includes Trinculo and Stefano, the king's jester and butler. Group number 3 is not really a group, it's just Ferdinand, the king's son. Let's discuss what happens to each of these groups in turn. In the first group, we find Antonio and Sebastian attempting to kill Alonso and Gonzalo in an attempt to make Sebastian the new king of Naples. Using magic, Ariel puts an end to this conspiratorial plot, and then later uses a magical banquet to force them to confront their guilt. In the second group, we find Stefano and Trinculo stumbling across Caliban, and with the aid of a whole lot of booze, the 3 of them conspire to try to kill Prospero, with the goal of becoming themselves king of the island. Prospero and Ariel also put an end to this conspiratorial plot. As for the third group, which is just Ferdinand, the king's son, ends up meeting up with Miranda, Prospero's daughter, and just as Prospero plans, the 2 of them end up falling in love. Later in the play, they get married, and even a few goddesses show up at the wedding at the request of Prospero. Ultimately, Prospero confronts Antonio, Alonso, and Caliban, having promised to give up his magic once his goal of regaining his dukedom is achieved. Antonio and Alonso restore Prospero's dukedom, and Caliban promises that he'll be good. Prospero forgives all of them. The king and his company are given the means by which to return to Naples. Prospero sets Ariel free, and in a final soliloquy, Prospero requests that the audience will set him free by means of their applause. If any of that didn't make sense, feel free to leave a comment and I will be happy to clarify or further explain. So, that's the summary. Now, there is an awful lot that one could say about this play, and just like one could say about any Shakespeare play. There is an awful lot in it about forgiveness and redemption. There's a lot in it about status and violence, and there is an enormous amount of stuff that one could say with a post-colonial reading of it. It's a very dense play, especially from a contemporary perspective. But in the short amount of time that I have with this video, I would like to first narrow our focus and talk about how difficult it is to classify this play. It's listed in the first folio as one of the comedies, and it certainly does fit the bill. After all, it has a wedding, and it has a happy ending for the protagonists, and the scenes with Caliban and Trinculo and Stefano are downright hilarious. So it's easy to see why it would be classified as a comedy. But it also gets into some really, really dark territory with multiple murder plots and Prospero himself having his story driven by revenge. And in that way, it feels more like Hamlet than As You Like It. On top of that, there is a layer of magic hovering over the whole thing. And sometimes that magic can feel reminiscent of the fairies in A Midsummer Night's Dream on the one hand, or on the other hand, it can feel like the witches in Macbeth. So to get around this mishmash of classifications and tones, modern scholars have created the classification of romances, into which they put The Tempest along with several other plays. Now, back when the first folio was published, which is where many of Shakespeare's plays were published for the first time, there was no such classification. There was only comedies, tragedies, and histories, and with those being the only three options, comedy does make the most sense. And before we wrap things up, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention that The Tempest is likely the final play that Shakespeare wrote by himself. And a lot of people really like to read Shakespeare himself into the role of Prospero, tying Prospero's decision to give up his magic to Shakespeare giving up his writing. And I'll actually talk more about this in my next video, which I hope to put up soon. So there you have it, The Tempest in a nutshell. As I mentioned, I will be talking about The Tempest some more in an upcoming video, which will be talking about the magic of place and the magic of the stage. Keep your eyes peeled for that one. And if you enjoy what I'm doing with this channel, go ahead and subscribe to it. Hit that bell icon if you want to be notified every month or so when I drop a new video. I would really appreciate that. And with that, it's time for me to go. Thanks so much for watching today. Fare you well. I commend you to your own content.